It was supposed to be an ordinary night in Indiana. Two college friends, full of life, laughter, and dreams, were driving home after a long day. But in an instant, everything changed. A devastating car crash left one of them dead, and the other clinging to life. At least, that's what their families were told. For the next 5 weeks, one family grieved their daughter, while another held out hope at her hospital bedside. But when the survivor finally woke up, the truth shattered both families forever. This is the heartbreaking true story of the hospital mix-up. In the spring of 2006, in Taylor University, Indiana, two young women were finishing another day of classes. Laura Van Ryn, 22 years old, was the kind of student who left an impression wherever she went. Warm-hearted, deeply faithful, and admired for her kindness, Laura had a way of making others feel seen. Her dream was to use her degree in social work to help people who couldn't speak for themselves. She was engaged to her longtime boyfriend, and her future looked bright. Whitney Sarek, 18 years old, was just beginning her college journey. Fun, outgoing, and deeply connected to her family, she was known for her sense of humor and her close bond with her siblings. Whitney was still figuring out her path, but she carried with her the promise of youth and the strength of her faith. That evening, the two women, along with several others, piled into a van. They were heading home after a banquet, full of conversation and laughter, never knowing tragedy was waiting just down the road. On April 26, 2006, near the small town of Marion, Indiana, the van carrying Taylor University students collided head-on with a tractor-trailer. The impact was catastrophic. Screeching metal, shattered glass, and cries of pain filled the night air. 5 people died instantly at the scene, their lives cut short in an instant. Others were left in critical condition. Emergency responders rushed to the chaos, trying to sort through the wreckage and save whoever could be saved. Among the victims, 2 young women stood out. One declared dead at the scene, her body battered and unrecognizable. The other unconscious but alive, though critically injured. In the confusion, the authorities made an assumption. The woman believed to be dead was identified as Whitney Sarek, the 18-year-old freshman. The unconscious survivor, battered and unrecognizable beneath swelling and bruises, was believed to be Laura Van Ryn, the 22-year-old senior. And just like that, 2 families' lives were turned upside down, based on an error that would not be uncovered for weeks. The Sarek family received the unthinkable news. Their daughter Whitney was dead. In shock, grief-stricken, and disbelieving, they traveled to the morgue to say their final goodbyes. The body was badly damaged, but the clothes and features seemed close enough. Through tears, they confirmed the identity. The funeral for Whitney Sarek was held just days later. Hundreds of mourners filled the church. Her classmates, her siblings, and her parents all gathered, clinging to each other through the kind of pain no parent should ever endure. They buried their daughter, believing her life had ended before it truly began. Meanwhile, the Van Ryn family rushed to the hospital. Their daughter Laura had survived, though barely. She was in a coma, her body swollen and bruised, hooked to machines that kept her alive. But she was alive, and that was enough. For weeks, the Van Ryns never left her side. They sat by her bed, reading her favorite Bible verses, holding her hand, and praying for a miracle. Nurses and doctors encouraged them, saying recovery would take time, but there was hope. 2 families. One buried their daughter, the other prayed over a survivor. Both clung to their truths, unaware that everything they believed was wrong. As the weeks dragged on, the Van Ryns began to notice small details that didn't add up. When their daughter began to stir, she showed signs of recognition. She squeezed hands, opened her eyes, and tried to speak, but something felt off. Her teeth looked different. Her face seemed subtly changed. Her mannerisms didn't match the Laura they knew so well. At first, they explained it away. After all, she had been through a devastating crash. She was on heavy medication. Of course, she would seem different. Of course, recovery would take time. But then came the voice. When the young woman finally spoke, her words were soft and slow, but clear enough. She gave her name. And it wasn't Laura. The truth hit like a lightning bolt. The woman in the hospital bed was not Laura Van Ryn. She was Whitney Sarek, the very same girl her family had buried 5 weeks earlier. The revelation sent shockwaves through both families. The Van Ryns were devastated to realize the daughter they thought they had saved was not theirs. All this time, they had been caring for someone else's child, while their own daughter, Laura, had been buried in Whitney's place. The Sareks were stunned. They had buried the wrong daughter. The girl they thought was dead was alive. Their grief transformed into disbelief, then joy, then guilt. Whitney herself had no memory of the crash. She woke up into a nightmare of confusion, only to learn that her family had mourned her death, and another family had mistaken her for their own daughter. Authorities admitted the devastating error. The mix-up had happened at the scene, where chaos and trauma clouded judgment. Identification was made based on clothing and assumptions, not DNA or dental records. The mistake had gone unchallenged for weeks. As the story made national headlines, questions swirled. How could this happen in modern America? How could two families be misled for so long? Investigators explained that, in the chaos of the crash, 5 bodies and multiple survivors were scattered across the wreckage. With so much trauma, faces unrecognizable, and identification rushed, a mistake had been made. And once the error was set in motion, it snowballed. The hospital treated the survivor as Laura. The Van Ryns, desperate to believe their daughter was alive, overlooked inconsistencies. Meanwhile, the Sareks, numbed by grief, accepted the burial of a daughter they never truly identified. It was a perfect storm of error, assumption, and grief. For the Van Ryns, the revelation was devastating. They had to face the reality that their daughter Laura had died in the crash, and they had buried her believing it was Whitney. They had spent weeks caring for another family's child, loving her as their own, only to lose her twice. Once in the crash, and once again when the truth was revealed. For the Sareks, the emotions were overwhelming. They had grieved deeply, buried their daughter, and lived with the unbearable pain of loss. And now she was alive. The joy was indescribable, but so was the guilt. They had said goodbye, they had let her go. And yet here she was. The families came together, united by tragedy and bonded forever by the strangest twist of fate. They forgave the mistakes, knowing no one could undo the pain. The hospital mix-up became one of the most infamous cases of mistaken identity in U.S. history. It raised urgent questions about how hospitals and morgues identify patients. It also highlighted the power of grief, and how families desperate for hope or closure can unknowingly accept the unthinkable. Books were written, documentaries aired. The families, though forever changed, shared their story as a testimony of faith, forgiveness, and resilience. And the world learned a chilling lesson. In the chaos of tragedy, even the most basic truths, life and death, identity and loss, can be turned upside down. The hospital mix-up is more than just a story of error. It's a story of human frailty, the limits of certainty, and the strength of families in the face of unimaginable pain. For 5 weeks, 2 families lived in opposite realities. One mourning, one hoping, only to have those realities violently reversed. And in the end, one daughter lived, another was lost, and both families were left with a haunting reminder. Sometimes the dead don't stay buried, and sometimes the living are hidden in plain sight.